Do you ever feel, I wish I hadn't said that?
Je ne regrette rien.
No regrets at all.
I regret nothing.
Shankar Aiyar, the introduction to your memoirs, very interestingly talks about how Sonia Gandhi encouraged you to write them because, as you say, she probably had no place or no productive role for you in the party. So before we get to the rest of the book, is that still the case? What is your relationship with the Congress party today?
None at all. In 2015, when she made that remark, it was in the realm of speculation that she had no plans for me. But the rejig of the Congress Working Committee, which took place a day or two ago, clearly shows that the party has no use for me. And they'd have no use for me because they regard me as a loose cannon. Well, they've now cut the last chain on the loose cannon.
Aren't you a loose cannon?
I don't think so. I'm a man of principle. It depends on how you look at it. I believe very strongly in democracy through Panchayati Raj, particularly in secularism, on which I'm a fundamentalist, in socialism, which the Congress party has now abandoned, and non-alignment, which again, as far as I can see, the Congress party has abandoned. But I joined the Nehruvian Indiravian Congress. I joined the Rajiv Congress. And the party has been drifting from its ideological moorings. And I think the pragmatists in the party regard me as dangerous because I keep trying to pull the party back to first principles. And that is why I've had to pay not a price, a very heavy price of being as excluded from my roots in the Congress as perhaps you were from the NDTV.
The book opens with a reception, as you mentioned, in the lawns of your home in 2015, when you first start talking about these memoirs, or Chiki Sarkar starts talking to you about these memoirs, and as you said, Mrs. Gandhi encourages you to write them. That was 2015. We are now in 2023. Have you been meeting with the Gandhi family, with the Congress leadership at all, or is it completely a broken relationship?
No, about 2 weeks ago, I did have a very relaxed, pleasant, one-on-one meeting with Sonia Gandhi after a gap literally of 10 years. So I began the discussion by telling her that it was 10 years since I had stepped into her room. I've had on 2 occasions in these last 10 years opportunities of meeting separately with Rahul Gandhi and with Priyanka Gandhi. But getting to meet them takes a decade. And then one knows that for another decade, one won't be meeting them to have a conversation. Of course, I see them at Congress functions. Of course, I was 6 or 7 times, I think 8 times, in the Bharat Jodo Yatra, but not to hold a conversation. And not to be involved, or even nobody asks me. And what I write, I don't think they read, with the result that I'm just cut off completely from the party. But I joined the party because I believed in its ideology. And I'm not going to leave the party. They may sack me, but I'm not leaving the party. I'm going to remain within the fold and continue doing what I can, which is writing. My speaking has got decreased a great deal because now television channels do not call me. And I try to ignore bites which are sought by people like ANI. And therefore I'm not in the public eye, but I continue to have the ability to think and write. And so I'll continue doing that.
You said that you would not leave the party and they could throw you out if they so wish. They did suspend you at one point, and it was for comments that you made about the Prime Minister, where you were talking, you used the word niche, and it was immediately conflated with the Prime Minister's caste. When you look back at that comment, or a previous comment that got you into the headlines for the wrong reason, where you referenced the Prime Minister's childhood being the son of a tea vendor, do you ever feel, I wish I hadn't said that?
Je ne regrette rien.
No regrets at all.
I regret nothing. And it's because I think I have been very unfairly pilloried. It started with you, in fact.
What did I do?
You pilloried me on the 17th of January, 2017, when I was alleged to have called Mr. Modi a chaiwala, when in fact it was he who called himself a chaiwala. And I was mocking his calling himself a chaiwala. But at that time, because I was just about to catch a flight, I didn't have the ammunition to answer you in 2017. But in this book, I have effectively answered you personally. But in addition to you personally, your colleague Rajdeep Sardesai has been selling his book by saying that Modi should write 5 thank you notes. And then he always raises a laugh when he says the last note should be to Shankar Aiyar. I think it's rubbish to suggest that I have so much influence that I alone can make Modi the Prime Minister or undo him.
No, obviously you can't.
So then, what is the point of your coming back to that now? Let me come to the niche comment. I said he's a low kind of person in English. That is to say, the English translation of niche kisam ka aadmi is a low kind of person. And Mr. Modi twisted that during an election campaign that was on at that time in Gujarat to claim that I had called him a low caste person. And without giving me the least opportunity to explain what I had said, the Congress party, in their desperation to win the Gujarat state election, thought that they could win it by suspending me. And when they suspended me, they sent me a show cause notice. And I kept wanting to answer the show cause notice. But the 3-member disciplinary committee, comprising Mr. A.K. Antony, Mr. Sushil Shinde, and Mr. Motilal Vora, separately and jointly asked me not to answer the thing because they were going to check with Rahul Gandhi what I should write in my answer to the show cause notice. And at that time, I was completely on my own and had been given no opportunity to explain myself. But then in August, in fact, August 20th, which is Rajiv Gandhi's birthday, I was told that I would be taken back into the Congress. I was. My suspension was removed. But that was in 2018. And 5 years later, I have no responsibilities given to me whatsoever in the Congress. My constituency, which I fought 7 times, has been handed over to the DMK. And I have never been asked to, or since then, I've never been asked to go on an election campaign. I have never been given any office in the Congress party. I'm not a member of parliament. So I'm as distanced as anyone can be from the party. But in my heart, I believe in the Nehruvian, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi Congress. I don't believe in the Narasimha Rao Congress. And ever since Narasimha Rao's time, the Congress has been drifting from its moorings, whereas I remain a Congress fundamentalist.
Okay, you've said a lot there, and while not wanting to make the conversation about those comments, so we'll move on quickly from those, I just want to say that we can look at them as a larger debate around elitism. It's something you actually address in your book, that, you were tagged as being one of the Doon school boys around Rajiv Gandhi, and you explained that actually you knew him quite little before you entered politics. But when we look at these controversial comments that you made about the Prime Minister, people might look at them as an example of what beleaguered the Congress, a certain kind of social snobbery, a certain kind of social elitism. You can quibble with me over the words, did I say chai wala, did I not? But you did mock the Prime Minister for his roots.
I mocked him for calling himself a chaiwala, which is not the same thing. I didn't mock the Prime Minister. I mocked his calling himself a chaiwala, but he played it and people believed him. And he played up his being an OBC, people believed him. He has been the Prime Minister for 9 years, whatever Shankar Aiyar may have said. Isn't it time he moved away from what happened then to what is happening now? What is happening now is symbolized by what's happening in Manipur. He should be addressing that. Does he? He accuses us of Tushtikara.
Okay, let's talk about, you say you're a member of the Nehru Congress, the Rajiv Congress, not the Narasimha Rao Congress. So let's start with a very interesting analysis in your book about 1984. And you talk about 4 things you thought should have happened differently.
I thought 6, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, maybe I'm remembering 4, you can add the other 2. And you say that 1, Rajiv Gandhi should have apologized immediately. 2, he should have removed his cousin, who was then the police commissioner of Delhi, Gautam Kaul. 3, the army should have been called in much earlier. And 4, a judicial inquiry should have been announced much earlier, not a few months later, as was the case. Why do you think these things did not happen? And the other very interesting thing you write, just one more detail from your book, you talk about how later a senior military officer tells you that the reason the army was not called earlier is that the army was in Meerut and it would have taken time to bring it. But you say that actually somebody had to explain to the people of India why it would take so long when in 1857 it took less time for the army to move from Meerut. This is one of the references you make. So go ahead and talk about 84.
What Major General Jamwal said, to just take your last point, is that the army unit in Delhi cantonment is always kept under strength in order to prevent a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat. So he said that even if I had been asked to send in my units, I would have had to wait until I got reinforcements from Meerut. Now, I am not an army man and have had nothing to do with military matters. So I've just cited that, although it was told to me perhaps a decade after the events. At that time, I didn't know. Also, I have to stress that I wasn't in PMO then. I had no idea that within a couple of months, I would be in PMO. I was very concerned with that because I am married to a Sikh lady. And my worry on the 1st of November, that is the day of the worst massacres, was I thought the Sikhs would retaliate. They didn't. But at that time on the 1st, I thought they'd retaliate. So I didn't know whether how my family would be under threat from Hindus because of my Sikh wife, or whether I would be under threat from Sikhs because of me and my children. So that was a major personal concern. But at the same time, I was utterly horrified that so many people should be killed and the government should seem to be so impotent. It was much later that I learned that because Rajiv Gandhi had just become Prime Minister and had inherited from his mother her most senior minister, who was destined to become the Prime Minister of India, as the Home Minister of India, and S.L. Khurana, a very highly reputed ICS officer, as the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. He thought he could leave it to them to control the thing. But when he found they were not able to control it, he went personally in his car in the middle of the night to some of the worst affected areas. And as a result, and he called in the army, and as a result of his actions, the rioting came down and eventually ended. So I think they was not behind any conspiracy. It has been hinted that Arun Nehru, who was the real political power in the party on those 2 or 3 days, was the one who had encouraged congressmen to voice their protest with this kind of massacre. But there has been no proof of this allegation, and I mention it only because it has come up in the media.
Yeah.
I've seen the allegation, but I have no proof for it.
You also think the apology came much too late?
Oh, far too late. The apology was far too late. It was delayed by more than 10 years. And it took a Sikh Prime Minister of the Congress Party to give that apology. Also, there was a dismissal of that cousin, Gautam Kaul. But it was not because of the Sikh riots. It was because he had proved his incompetence again in 1986 on Gandhi Jayanti, when a Sikh terrorist had taken refuge on a tree from which he could have shot dead both the Prime Minister and the President. But he didn't. He had a 12-bore gun. And because Rajiv knew a great deal about ballistics, as soon as he heard the first shot, he knew that it was a 12-bore gun. And he advised the President that, no, let's sit through this, and then you send your family home, but let us ensure that we complete what we have to do, which was going to Rajghat and to Shantivan. And they did it. He's a man of immense courage, but he understood the risks he was taking. And had he dismissed that cousin for incompetence in the Sikh rioting, not the Sikh rioting,
the anti-Sikh pogrom, yes.
It was a pogrom. Then I think he'd have got the credit for it. And if he'd announced a judicial inquiry immediately, instead of, as you said, a few months later, I think it would have gone down well. But he did one thing for which he is rarely given credit. While he may not have spoken as he ought to, and I have underlined why he should have spoken, he did act. He went to Hussainiwala, and I went with him on the 23rd of March. And that began the process of informing the Punjabis that India was with Punjab and Punjab was a part and parcel of India. That the Sikh community was not alien to us, it was one of us. And it led within a few months to the Longowal Accord. And I have quoted a journalist, I've forgotten what his name was, a Sikh gentleman, who came to me and said that Hossainiwala is all hypocrisy. But it wasn't. We now know that the first thing he did after winning the elections, and Arjun Singh had a big role to play in winning the elections for him in Madhya Pradesh, he removed him from being chief minister after 24 hours and sent him to Punjab. Nobody knew then why. But if you read Arjun Singh's book, it turned out that he was chosen, handpicked, cherry-picked, if you like, to be the principal interlocutor with the Sikhs. And then he handed over, because he needn't have called an election, but he called it, knowing that the Akali Dal will win.
Okay, you seem to suggest that the Rajiv Congress was closer to the ideological moorings of the Congress party that you identify with. But there are two other sort of blots on that record. And one is what happens in the Shah Bano case, the case involving alimony to divorced Muslim women. And the second is the Shilanyas and unlocking Ayodhya. Now, I read your book.
They are two separate.
I understand.
Let's deal with each of them.
Let's deal with each of them separately. Let's pick up the Shah Bano case first.
Sure.
And also I want to quote another book that I read alongside yours, which is Neerja Chaudhary's book, which has a very interesting nugget. I don't know if you'll agree with it. She argues that Sonia Gandhi was not convinced of the direction in which Rajiv Gandhi was moving on Shah Bano. This is
I've said that in my book.
I understand. But she...
And I quoted not BP Tripathi,
Yes.
but Rajiv Gandhi.
So let's talk
Rajiv said to me at that time that even Sonia disagrees. I quoted that in my book.
So can we start there?
Yes,
Can we start
sure.
with that story?
Can I very quickly sum it up?
Yes.
There was immediately after the Muslim Women's Protection of Rights on Divorce Bill was passed in May 1986. In September, a very well-known nominal Muslim jurist filed a writ petition in the Supreme Court, arguing that this was ultra-virus of the Constitution, that it was illegal and immoral, and that case went before the Supreme Court in September 1986. Now, unfortunately, the law's delays are the law's delays. But the Supreme Court in 2001 gave its judgment on the Dania Latifi petition. And they said, far from reversing the Shah Bano judgment, it was never reversed. Far from reversing the Shah Bano judgment, the solution found through the judicial genius jurisprudential genius of Ashok Sen and the political good sense of Rajiv Gandhi was to codify Muslim law in respect of divorce, and to, by codifying it, to make eventually, that's all explained why eventually, the Muslim Waqf boards responsible for the girl if the male members of her family fail to do so, or if she fails to get remarried. And in 78% of the cases, I've cited a survey, Muslim women get remarried, divorced Muslim women get remarried within 2 years. So it's not, as for many Hindu widows, a lifelong problem. Not for all, but for many, it's not. Anyhow, the state Waqf board was made responsible under our civil law.
Right.
And they said that if the state Waqf board doesn't look after her, the board will be called before the magistrate, and they'll be forced to do so by judicial order. And that judgment has lasted for more than 20 years. And for more than 20 years, all Muslim women's divorce cases have been handled under that law. So how can it be said that he was being communal when he listened to what Muslims had to say, listened also to what some Muslim dissidents like Arif Muhammad Khan had to say, listened, as Madhu Gandavate said in the Lok Sabha, that he listened to the opposition. He called in various people, not as Wajahat Habibullah suggests, one person, namely MJ Akbar. And he thought about it, and when he came to the conclusion that it was his duty as the Prime Minister of India to ensure that our minority community felt wanted and respected. And that this question of Muslim women being divorced and then left on their own, his first question that he asked was, why did the Sessions Court award the lady Shabana 25 rupees a month? And then the Jabalpur High Court raises it to the munificent sum of 179 rupees and 20 paise in case 179 rupees is not enough.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court, which waxes eloquent, does nothing about increasing that. He ensured, and then he said to me, after it was all over, he said that my opponents tell me that, I'm not quoting his exact words because I'm speaking from memory. He said, my opponents say that no woman, Muslim or non-Muslim, is now going to vote for me. And he says that no man, especially people of liberal outlook, and no non-Muslim man is also going to vote for me. The only people who will vote for me because of this are a handful of Muslim clerics So whom am I appeasing? He asked me that question. Rhetorically.
Yeah.
He didn't expect an answer.
So what part did his wife not agree with?
I don't know. You'll have to ask her.
But it was
All
clear.
that
It
Rajiv
was
said
clear.
to me,
Yeah.
all that Rajiv said to me is, this is in the same connection as the other remark that he made. He said that even Sonia does not agree with me. But he did it. And he was so fond of his wife, so respectful of his wife, that if he did it, there is a principle involved. And unfortunately, that incident marked the alliance between the left, the liberals, and the Hindu extremists. And it brought down Rajiv's government. But Rajiv's principle was endorsed by the highest court in the land and has ultimately prevailed for the last 20 years, and yet nobody talks about this.
Basically, you're arguing that he looked for a solution within the personal law.
Yes. And why not? The personal law, as it's given in the Sharia, and they all agreed to this, because he was consulting with the Muslim theologians, apart from others. They all explained to him that the Muslim personal law on divorce is not some barbarous Arab desert practice of the 7th century. A Muslim girl gets married through a nikah-nama, which is a contract. And that nikah-nama only stipulates what is to happen in case the marriage fails. That is why it's not understood by so many Indians. Because among Hindus, divorce is a very rare practice and often leads to great immobilization of the divorced Hindu woman. But this is not the case in Muslim personal law as distinct from Muslim personal practice. And it was because the interpretation and enforcement of Muslim personal law was in the hands of Maulvis and Mullahs. Therefore, Rajiv took it out of their hands and put it into the civil law practice of India.
Let's move on to Ayodhya. Let's move on to Ayodhya.
Yeah, sure.
There too, it's been suggested, and you mentioned Arun Nehru in the context of what happened in 1984 with the Sikhs. It has also been suggested that, maybe it was Arun Nehru who really drove this idea of, unlocking
the Shilanyas is one thing. The unlocking is another.
Okay.
If you're going to talk about it, don't talk about the Shilanyas. Talk about the Babri Masjid question.
The question that I would ask you is a larger question.
Yeah.
You have argued that Rajiv's Congress was closer to the ideological moorings of the party than the Narasimha Rao Congress. But Rajiv Gandhi is also accused of trying to find this crazy balance between the Hindu vote and the Muslim vote. And the reason I asked you about Ayodhya and Shah Banu in the same question is that one was seen as an example of one and the other was seen as an example of the other. So let's talk about where you want to start.
I have just explained.
I have understood the Shah Banu. Yes, so let's
please don't bring it up.
Okay.
And when you're talking about Ayodhya, please distinguish between the opening of the locks, which took place in February of 1986, and the Shilanyas, which took place in 1989, November.
Okay.
And let us consider these issues calmly and without passion. You began by asking me about the Shilanyas. So let's start with the Shilanyas. By 1989, especially after the terrible loss in Tamil Nadu, which he had visited 13 times at the instance of Mr. G.K. Mupadar, who was supposed to be the great expert, and we won only 26 seats in the assembly. And I didn't tell Rajiv that many of them were of the constituencies he had not visited. So Mupadar's advice on Tamil Nadu was disastrous, but it also led to Jagannath Mishra's removal from the chief ministership of Bihar by the Bihar Congress Party. So the party was in a panic, and Rajiv therefore brought back R.K. Dhawan, who had been firmly excluded for the first 4 years. And as soon as R.K. Dhawan came in, you got this balancing act being advised. So I have been extremely critical in my book about the Shilanyas.
Yes.
So I think you have to acknowledge that I have said that Rajiv Gandhi was panicked into abandoning the principles of a lifetime by listening to this argument about the Shilanyas. Now, what was the argument about the Shilanyas that people like Dhawan were putting forward? It is that if you ensure that the Babri Masjid continues to stand, the Muslims will be delighted, and if you do the Shilanyas outside the disputed area, then the Hindus will be delighted. What happened, I've said in my book, is that seeing the masjid standing, for those Hindus, for whom this was an issue, they said that we're not voting for you. And the Muslims, seeing the Shilanyas taking place, said our vote is not for you. So instead of winning both sides, he lost both sides. And that was really a tragedy. And it was the instant reason why he went down from over 400 seats to under 200. And he therefore realized that he didn't want to shift the responsibility, that he had taken and endorsed wrong advice, which is why the whole of 1990, which turned out to be his last full year of life, he devoted to first doing an introspection with everybody concerned, then convening the Convention Against Communalism, which I have described at great length, and what Narasimha Rao and Gadgil did to me and Akbar, and the questions that they asked, and how I answered them, and how they then dismissed the paper, saying these may be your views, they're not ours, they're not the Congress parties. And then Rajiv undertaking the Sadbhavna Yatras, which took us all over the country, where the slogans were all a total reaffirmation of fundamental secularism. Now, all this needs to be seen in perspective. Was it a sin that he committed in 1989? I thought so in 1989. But looking at what he did in 1990, I would call it a huge political mistake. And I don't buy the argument that he was trying deliberately as a matter of policy or as a matter of his fundamental policy to balance Hindus against Muslims. He believed in equal rights to religion for the majority as for the minorities.
Okay, you remain, of course, an admirer of Rajiv Gandhi. Is that a correct
That's not because I'm blind. It's because I have seen him in action and seen him as a good man, an upright man, an honest man, a man of principle who was betrayed by some key aides. But why are we talking about all this? All this forms the bulk of my next book. We were here to talk about my current book.
This is
all about myself.
By the way,
yeah, but what about myself?
I'm coming to it.
You're coming. This is now.
Hang on. All of the things I have cited are from your book. By the way,
yes, they are. And I've also said there that you people like you should wait for the next book. Okay, I've said it.
I wanted to actually share a story.
But you have to sell your program. So
no, hang on. Forget who has to sell what. I was going to come to a very, I would say, acerbic story from your book about Sanjay Gandhi. When you stopped me midway, I said you're obviously somebody who identifies with Rajiv Gandhi, what's and all. But there's a very there's a little paragraph in the book when you are informed that Sanjay Gandhi's plane has crashed. And you write in the book, I'm paraphrasing, you write in the book, you said, I don't know if there's a God, but if there is a God, thank you, God, for saving us from this catastrophe. I found it, people aren't usually that candid in a book. You were being only partly funny, right?
Well, that's exactly what happened. And I think it would be very wrong of me to not mention it. I have mentioned it. I have also mentioned my desperately opposing the emergency of Mrs. Gandhi's. And at that time, everyone associated with that emergency.
Yeah.
I thought the emergency was not an aberration, but the first assault on our constitutional rights. So I was very much against the emergency, although at that time I was a government servant. And I made my views clear to all my colleagues. I even made it clear when I came back to India that I was dead opposed to what was happening. And I described at that time the greatest joy in life was to lie on the lawns in the November sun of Patiala House when I came back on home leave and listen to the proceedings of the Shah Commission, which were being broadcast from loudspeakers. So I was dead against the emergency. And Sanjay Gandhi had a life that was effectively confined to the emergency.
Yeah.
He was the face of the worst things about the emergency. So I could have discreetly hidden this idea, but it wouldn't have been Shankar Aiyar.
This is true. Now let's talk about a very moving portion in the book, which is how your family comes as refugees from Pakistan to India. And there's a very, very vivid, disturbing account of a child who is killed, I think, in front of your father.
He wasn't killed, but
attacked rather.
No, they were going to.
Am I getting the story wrong? Okay,
you got this, but then it was just marginally wrong.
Okay.
I'd like to tell the right story.
Please.
I was 6 years old when partition took place.
Yes.
My mother and her children were in Shimla, which was given to India. My father was at the end of a 20-year stay in Lahore and had, in fact, according to my mother, intended to become a Pakistani because his practice was largely in the areas of India that became West Pakistan. So we were living in Shimla because my father was a very prominent, very reputed income tax expert. And he primarily practiced in the appellate court. And the appellate tribunal of the income tax would move to Shimla in the summer. So Amma would keep house for him in Shimla and he'd visit us from time to time from Lahore. That's how on the 14th of August, my father was in Pakistan, and on the 15th of August, we were in India. And we were living in a building called Three Bridges on what used to be called by the British as Jacko Hill, but is now called, I think, Jakku Hill.
Yes.
So we were living there, and at about, it must have been before 8 p.m., because I was always put to bed very strictly by 8 p.m. So it must have been about 7 o'clock. That a group of Sikhs, a kind of Jatha of Sikhs, banged very heavily on the door. My mother opened the door and they said, "Where are the Muslims?" And she replied, "They've gone to Pakistan." But the boy of my age who belonged to that family and lived on the ground floor was my best friend. So I was about to say, no, they haven't gone to Pakistan, they're here. When something in my mother's eye prevented me from opening my mouth.
Yeah.
And the Jatha were very disappointed to be absolved of their, to be deprived of their victims. And they broke the kitchen, which in those days used to be built outside the main house. And then they went away. But next day, there was a body, a slashed body, discovered on the Jacko Hill.
Yeah. So
maybe they found some victim. But the boy himself and his family, which ranged from a baby in arms to an over 80-year-old woman, they were all saved. But only because my mother signaled me with her eye that I shouldn't speak. Now you may remember the scene from Ice Candy Man, Bapsi Sidhwa's novel, where an almost exactly same thing happens.
Yes.
But in that case, the child says that the maid is in the house and she gets caught and terrible things happen to her. So when I read The Ice Candy Man, I felt that people will think I'm inventing this story. So I just have to say that you have to trust me. It actually happened.
And later, many years later, when you're actually a minister in government, you talk about how Pervez Musharraf, General Musharraf, wanted his birth certificate to be pulled out from the records of a Delhi municipal corporation. And you asked, maybe half cheekily, for the same from Lahore. And you had
fully cheekily.
And was surprised by the speed at which you were then able to procure those papers.
I made my remark at about 6 o'clock in the evening. All of us, the whole delegation, we were 55 of us, were taken to the Lahore municipality. And that meeting took place at about 6 in the evening. That's when I asked for my birth certificate. And at 9 o'clock the following morning, literally overnight, when I came down, I found the birth certificate duly attested, lying inside a brown envelope, and everybody waiting for me to open it. And they all applauded, and of course I joined in the applause.
Yeah. Now, your belief on India-Pakistan relations has remained a much debated one. You have spoken about, your belief in a kind of peace that some might call today a utopian idea, especially look at what the turmoil within Pakistan today. Do you think, given your experience in Pakistan as a foreign service officer, your being on track to initiatives, do you think today, looking at the churn in Pakistan, that you have too romantic a view of it?
Look at the Soviet Union. The churn in the Soviet Union was much more serious than whatever is happening in Pakistan now. And yet, we retained a policy of friendship with that country, whether it was called the Soviet Union or it became the Federation, the Russian Federation, and has remained at the same level whether Brezhnev is in power or Putin is in power. So there are some elements of foreign policy that deal with permanent interests. They don't deal with individuals. We have never had a stable relationship with Pakistan. And my experience of Pakistan has been that there is an immense fund of goodwill among the Pakistani people for us. So I have two pleas to make, which I've made in the book. Number one, we must leverage the goodwill among the Pakistani people for our relationship with that country's people, even if not with the state. So with the people, we mustn't punish them for acts of state. And we're doing that by denying them visas. Their relatives in huge numbers live in India, and I lived among them, I worked among them for 3 years. I issued more than 3 lakh visas in 3 years. I brought in 10 Pakistani journalists to the window from which we handed out the passports. After I had succeeded in reaching 1 lakh visas within 6 months of opening the visa office. And when these journalists handed over the 990, what do you call it, 9.9 thousand visas, the last 10 visas, the last person got it. I gave him a tin of Darjeeling tea, and I maafied the visa fee. And suddenly, all the others waiting, they went into slogans. Hindustan ke Consul General, Zindabad, Zindabad. They were saying, yahan koi pabandi nahi, koi rishwat nahi.
Right.
Now, if that is the kind of reaction, and I've given several instances of this in my book, from the people of Pakistan when we are nice to them, why do we take it out on them when we want to quarrel with the state? And as far as the state is concerned, if we have the courage to go into surgical strikes against them, why don't we have the courage to sit across a table from them? To sit across a table and conduct a dialogue with them does not amount to conceding everything that they want. But it does mean engagement. And I was perhaps my happiest moment in this year has not been the welcome that is apparently being accorded to my book, according to my publisher. But when 5 former High Commissioners of India to Pakistan sat on a panel at the posthumous release
Of Sati
Lamba's book, all 5 of them, who have been through some of the worst times in India-Pakistan relations, insisted that we must engage with the Pakistani state. To engage with them is not to lose out. And if we engage with them persistently, which I have used the expression,
uninterrupted
becomes
dialogue.
somewhat notorious.
Yes.
Uninterrupted and uninterruptible. We've seen under Manmohan Singh that we can even talk Kashmir and arrive at a 4-point agreement.
Okay.
So therefore, I am not being starry-eyed as I'm portrayed as being when I plead for a good relationship or a viable relationship between India and Pakistan. I'm being utterly realistic. And I insist on this point that India cannot become a Vishwaguru so long as it doesn't have a happy, harmonious relationship in its own neighborhood, primarily with Pakistan.
Okay, we will have a separate conversation on India-Pakistan because we could talk for hours about that and debate that for hours. I want to end with where your life starts, the school and college years that we haven't actually spoken about. One of the interesting things that you say in your book is that you say that there's a media stereotype about Rajiv Gandhi and his Doon school boys. And you make the argument that actually you didn't start working with Rajiv because of an old connection or because you knew him well before. And that you found this a bit of a caricature. So today when, a lot is said about the elite years, again, I come back to the social elitism of Doon school, Stephanian elitism that defined the politics of that time. Do you want to talk about how you don't fully agree with that
I don't agree with
characterization? Yes.
It is true that many of us came from well-off families.
Yes.
But then what do you do with an IAS and an IFS that is constituted by people from well-off families? I mean, who in the civil service is not from a well-off family? So we were there, but we weren't feathering our nests or trying to promote the class interest. 99% of our time was taken in dealing with the problems of the disempowered. And my main work with Rajiv Gandhi was on the Panchayat Raj bill. Now, what is elitist about the Panchayat Raj amendments? We have, and I want to stress this because you didn't bring it up, and I need to bring it up.
Okay.
Under the Panchayat Raj amendments of the elitist Rajiv Gandhi, we today have 14 to 15 lakh elected women. We have more elected women in India alone than in the rest of the world put together. And yet, this is not the subject of celebration. I'm amazed. It's so elitist to ignore these women and so elitist to not understand that when panchayat elections take place, unless they are prevented by amendments such as those made in Rajasthan and Haryana, it is the poor, the Dalit, the tribal women who get elected much more than the local zamindar, because the local zamindar's wife would tend to spend her time in town, not in the village, and approaching her is a problem. But people know that if they vote for a Dalit poor woman, then she has nowhere to go but stay in the village, and that they can easily go to her door and say, my drain is not allowing water to go, or my tap is not working. So we have conducted a profound socio-economic change in India through that Panchayati Raj bill. And who prepared it? It was all Rajiv's idea, a Doon school boy. And it was all written up by Shankar Aiyar, a Doon school boy. Not my fault that my parents sent me to school, but it is, I think, to the credit of my mother that instead of taking us out of school, when my father died, I was only 12 years old. She said, education is the biggest asset. Yeah. And when she died, there was 300 rupees in her account. And because we didn't inherit any property, my brother and my sister and I are perfectly happy if instead my mother had put the insurance money into a 2-story building in Malchamar. We'd have ended up quarreling over who's going to inherit their house. So I'm deeply grateful that my mother was penurious, and very, very grateful to her that she thought education is the only asset worth having. So we were concerned in the technology missions with what? With things that would assist the poorest and the loneliest and the lowest. For example, the oil seeds mission, which is never talked about. Did you know, I'm sure, that edible oil is one of the biggest items on our import bill. Under the technology mission of Rajiv Gandhi, oil seeds production in India doubled over 10 years. Doubled. It went from 9 to 18 million tons. And oil seeds are grown where? Where you can't grow other crops. Who are the farmers in these rain-starved areas? It is the poorest. Now he went to Kalahandi and he made a very sensible decision there that the reason they were having so many famines is simply because they were cultivating rice in a rain shadow area, and rice is a very thirsty crop. So he said, let's ensure under the area development program that rice is provided at a subsidized price so that they can grow ragi, which is of course possible in a rain shadow area. So the only thing we ever did was for the poor. And that is why Rajiv insisted on calling himself a socialist, despite all the efforts of Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia to get him to start the reform process. He started the reform process, but the emphasis was always on the poor. So why are we called elite? It's not our fault that our children, that our parents were rich, and that we took advantage of our education, not to buzz off to the United States or to Singapore, but to remain in this country and to serve this country.
Finally, you call your years at St. Stephen's College lyrical, which of course makes me smile because it's also my college. However, there is a certain Stephanian tendency to be so obsessed with clever wordplay that you can come off sounding as arrogant. So funny but arrogant. So let me give you 2 examples from your own life. One is the famous Natwar Singh Shankar Aiyar story, where Natwar Singh goes back to college and Natwar Singh...
I hope you get the story right.
Okay, why don't you tell the story?
All right. I was invited by my old college to address their informal Wednesday after dinner meeting. And when I got there, I was taken into the principal's room. Now, when we were in St. Stephen's, I don't know about your time, you were only called into the principal's room to be rusticated. So I was overcome with a certain nervousness from the past. And so when they presented me with the visitor's book, I was a bit bewildered as to what I should write. So to get inspiration, I started going through the previous pages. And I saw an entry by Natwar. It said, K. Natwar Singh, Minister of State for External Affairs. And in the comments column, he wrote, I am what I am because of St. Stephen's. So I asked for a pencil and I wrote under it, why blame the college? Well, it's a typical Stephanian story.
Yes.
The other story I wanted to tell you.
Can I ask the other story?
Yeah, sure.
Ajay Makhan. Now, I know you're not going to immediately know why I'm asking you this. You are sports minister. You've been put in the sports ministry. You don't want to be in the sports ministry. Mr. Markan writes a letter calling you obstructionist and saying that Shankar Aiyar is being obstructionist. The Commonwealth Games are going to be held or are to be held or whatever. And you turn around and you say he can't possibly know the word obstructionist. He went to Hansraj College.
Did you really read the book?
Yes.
Because then you got
okay, that's what I want you to tell us.
Let me tell you what the story was. Yes, I had opposed the Commonwealth Games, and yes, I had requested, not only in private but also in public, the Prime Minister to relieve me of the responsibility of looking after Mr. Kalmadi.
Yes.
After having told Mr. Kalmadi at our first official meeting that if he did not submit his utilization certificate for some large sums of money being released to him, I said, I had no desire, Suresh, to spend time with you in Tihar jail. And he did go to Tihar.
That's right.
So I was dead opposed to that. So I privately, in cabinet, in smaller meetings, when I met the Prime Minister, and at public events, like my giving the Sportsman of the Year award to Vishwanath Anand, I said to his parents who would come to collect it, I said to the best sportsman in India, from the worst sports minister that India has had, I was pleading to be removed. And fortunately, my pleas were attended to, and MS Gill was put in my place. Thereafter, in the next government, Mr. Ajay Markan became the sports minister. And we had a very good relationship. He was in fact due to come to my constituency, where there is a SAIS, Sports Authority of India, playground, and I needed to get some things done there. So I arranged with him that he would come. So please note that my relationship at a personal level with Ajay Markan was extremely cordial. In fact, when he stood in his first election, and I was in charge of, or I was one of those in charge of the Delhi elections, it was I who opened his election office. So there's a great deal more to my relationship with Ajay Markan than the quip
I was only talking about the Sifanian style quip. Yes.
What he did was, I spoke in a TV interview with somebody from, I think, India Today, who, and I referring to Arun Puri having asked the Prime Minister why had I raised objections on financial grounds, and the Prime Minister replied no, he had ideological objections. I was asked by this girl who had obtained a secret letter I had written to the Prime Minister objecting on financial grounds to what was happening in the games. So she was displaying that letter to me, and she said, how could the Prime Minister say that there were no differences on financial matters? And it was on ideological grounds that this difference was. I confronted with my own writing. And I said that I confessed that I did have financial objections as well, which I had conveyed to the Prime Minister. This, of course, caused a rumpus in PMO. And Ajay Markan, my friend Ajay Markan, was asked to write me a letter in which my answers in Parliament were cited in order to show that I was being hypocritical. Now, when you speak in Parliament, you defend your government.
Right.
And he said that this shows that Shankar Aiyar's approach was dichotomous.
Oh, dichotomous, right.
A big word to use. So I said in an interview to a TV channel, I should never talk to your breed. But I said to them that I want to talk to you about the alternative sports policy I was attempting to evolve. But please don't ask me about the Manmohan controversy. And then at the end, he insisted on asking me about it. So you're in a jam, the camera is on,
Correct.
You can't say no. And you people take advantage of that. Very illegitimate advantage. But you often do. That's your game. That's your
So the game is just a job.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
And you're always trying to trip people up
Not at
instead
all.
of getting them to say what they want. So I cracked a joke. I said that he's used a big word like dichotomous. I don't know how a BA honors, a BA pass student from Hansraj College knows such big words.
Yeah.
And that caused a rumpus. It caused a rumpus, and then my college principal, that's the St. Stephen's principal, went personally to Hansraj College to apologize. There's a team from Hansraj College who came and met me and said, "Sir, we are all appearing for the IAS exam. What will happen if we say that we are from Hansraj College?" I said, if anybody comes to you and prevents you from getting a job on these grounds, please let me know. I'll clarify. But of course, you people are not interested.
But my question was a little bit different, and let's end
Your
with that.
question was, does this prove you elitist?
No, I was going to say that there is a certain Stephanian subculture.
That's right. Yeah.
I was talking about that, a college subculture that today in a changing India may come across as elitist. And some of it is funny, but nevertheless it can be dubbed snobbish.
It is, yes. And I'll give you another example
Yes.
of exactly that. Suvash Dua, who was from Sanaa, he said to me, "Why do you fellows walk around this place as if you own it?" So my reply to him was, "We don't, so why don't you?" And that was, I think, a very Doon School remark to make. But we laughed. The jokes cracked against me.
Yeah.
Arif Kamran described me as Shankar Aiyar. This is in college. Is always willing to sacrifice truth at the altar of an aphorism. It was my friend Shankar Gupta, I've quoted him,
Yes.
who, when I was ultimately allowed to come into the Foreign Service after being damned as a communist, he then said that they let you in because they discovered you were a Marxist, but of the Groucho kind. So it is very much a part of the ethos of St. Stephen that we speak English. If you go to a college where they generally speak Hindi, they'll be cracking jokes at each other in Hindi, which maybe you and I would find difficult to understand, because cracking jokes in languages requires a very deep knowledge of the language. It's a play on words. It's a play on quotations. So therefore, I don't think we are being snobbish. Yes, we are Macaulay ki aulad. But then what is the Indian civilizational heritage? It is synthesis. Whatever comes from outside, we synthesize. Mahatma Gandhi said, "I do not want the windows of my house to be closed and my doors to be stuffed. I want the winds from all countries to blow about in my house, but I refuse to be blown off by any one of them." That is the true Stephanian, and may I say so, Dosco creed.
Okay, since you're so clever with words, what's the one word Shankar Aiyar would use to describe himself?
Oh, I've used it in the title, Maverick.
That I have to agree with. Thank you, Shankar Aiyar. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.